The knock came just after midnight, sharp and urgent, echoing through the stillness of the prairie. Lydia Dawson froze, the poker clattering from her hand onto the hearth. For 3 long years she had grown accustomed to silence, just the mournful cry of coyotes across the hills and the sigh of wind through the cottonwoods. No one came calling this far out, not at such an hour. Her heart pounded in her chest as she lifted the lantern from the mantel, its flame quivering with her shaking hand. She had lived alone since her husband's death, and loneliness had taught her 2 things: how to endure quiet, and how to dread the unexpected dot. The knock came again, louder this time. Lydia's breath hitched. She snatched her shawl from the chair and moved toward the barn where the sound had come. The lantern swung against her thigh, scattering golden light across the wet ground. The storm had just broken, sheets of rain thrashing the roof, thunder growling like a restless beast. She pushed open the heavy barn door, its hinges groaning in protest. At first, she saw nothing but the restless shadows of her horses shifting nervously in their stalls. Then her eyes dropped and her breath caught. A man slumped against the frame, his head bowed, his long black hair soaked and plastered against his face. Blood streaked down his side, dripping into the mud. An arrow jutted from his ribs, its shaft quivering with each labored breath. For one shattering moment, Lydia thought she was staring at death itself. Then he lifted his head, his eyes locked on hers, dark, sharp, unyielding. She felt the weight of that gaze pierce her as surely as the arrow pierced his flesh. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His very presence carried a command, a plea, and a warning all at once. Lydia knew instantly what he was, an Apache. Her blood ran cold. Every story she had heard in town came rushing: back raids, ambushes, neighbors who had disappeared without a trace. To harbor him would mean ruin, perhaps even a noose if the wrong person found out. And yet, she could not turn away. The storm raged around them, rain hammering the roof, wind tearing through the gaps in the wood. Without another thought, Lydia bent down and slipped her arm beneath his, heaving with all her strength. He was heavier than he looked, but desperation lent her power. Together they staggered inside, the barn doors slamming shut behind them. She eased him onto a bed of hay, her lantern's light spilling across the planes of his chest, bronze and glistening with sweat. His breath came in short, ragged gasps. Blood seeped fast from the wound. Lydia's heart raced. If she didn't act, he would die right there in her barn. "I should let you go," she whispered. Though her trembling hands betrayed her doubt, her mind screamed of danger, what the town would say, what the law would do, but her body moved on its own. She tore a strip from her petticoat, pressing it firmly against the wound. Heat from his skin burned her fingertips. He flinched but did not push her away. His lips parted. A single word, thick with accent, fell into the air. Water. Lydia nearly dropped the lantern at the sound of his voice. He was alive, awake enough to ask. She rushed to fetch a tin cup, filled it from the barrel, and brought it to him. His hand brushed hers as he drank, rough and warm, sending a tremor through her chest. When he lowered the cup, his gaze lingered on her. Not with fear, not with hostility, with something else, something that unsettled her more than either. For the first time in years, Lydia felt seen, not as the widow the town pitied, not as the stubborn woman clinging to a failing ranch, but as a woman. The thought unsettled her, yet it also sparked something buried deep, something she thought had died with her husband. The warrior's head fell back, his breath slowing. Lydia sat beside him in silence, her shawl slipping from her shoulders. She should have been afraid. Instead, she felt strangely alive, her pulse echoing the thunder outside. "Why? You saved me?" He rasped suddenly, his eyes opening again, piercing into hers. Lydia's throat tightened. The truth rose before she could stop it. "Because," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the storm. "I couldn't let you die." Outside, lightning split the sky. Inside, in the hush of the barn, a fire flickered quietly to life, one that Lydia knew could burn her whole world down. The morning broke gray and heavy, the prairie wrapped in fog like a secret unwilling to be spoken. Lydia Dawson moved carefully about the barn, every creak of the wood sounding louder than it should. She kept her lantern dim, though daylight spilled through the slats. The man lying in her hay-cale, she had learned last night, was still breathing, his chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm now. Lydia had not slept. Her mind had been caught between terror and something far more dangerous, wonder. She had saved an Apache warrior. If the neighbors knew, they would drag her to town, spit in her face, maybe worse. But when she had looked into his eyes, she hadn't seen the monster they described in hushed stories. She had seen a man wounded, proud, alive. She knelt by his side, studying him in the pale morning light. His muscles were taut even in rest, his bronze skin marked with scars that told stories she could never guess. Around his neck hung a strand of turquoise beads, worn smooth by time, and on his arm rested a band of leather inlaid with carved bone. His presence filled the barn as though he belonged to the land more than any settler ever could. Suddenly, his eyes opened. Dark and sharp, they caught hers instantly. Lydia nearly stumbled back, her breath quickening. She half expected him to leap at her, but he didn't. Instead, his lips moved, voice low, rough like gravel. "Where?" "I am?" Lydia swallowed hard, gripping the edge of a wooden beam for steadiness. "On my ranch." "In my barn," she said quietly, aware of how her voice trembled. He studied her, unblinking. "Why you help?" The same question from the night before. This time she found no easy answer. Her throat tightened. "Because I couldn't leave you to die." For the first time, something softened in his expression. Not quite gratitude, but recognition, like he understood her words deeper than she meant them. He shifted, a groan tearing from his chest as the arrow wound throbbed. Lydia hurried forward, pressing a firm hand against his side to stop the movement. "Don't, please. You'll tear it worse." Their eyes locked again. Her hand lingered longer than necessary on his skin, warm, alive, startlingly human. She pulled away quickly, wrapping her shawl tighter around herself as if to shield her from her own thoughts. "What's your name?" she asked, voice faint. He hesitated, then said, "Cale." The name rolled through her like thunder, strong and foreign, yet it felt right. She repeated it under her breath, almost afraid to give it sound. "Cale." He watched her mouth form the syllables, something unreadable glinting in his gaze. Lydia busied herself with the water bucket, her hands shaking as she poured a cup. "You shouldn't speak much. Just drink." She knelt and held the cup to his lips. This time his hand rose, rough fingers curling around hers to steady it. The contact sent a jolt through her, a warmth that startled her more than his strength. Cale drank slowly, then let his hand fall away. But his eyes never left her. Outside, a wagon rattled down the distant road. Lydia's heart lurched. If anyone came asking, she would have to lie. She had never been a liar before. Yet when she looked at Cale, broken, proud, dangerous, she knew she would lie again if she had to. "You can't be seen here," she whispered fiercely, leaning close. "The town would kill you, and me too." Cale's mouth curved, not quite a smile, but something like defiance. "Then, no one see." His calm unsettled her more than panic would have. He spoke as though it were simple, as though hiding an Apache warrior in her barn was no more dangerous than keeping a stray horse. Lydia stood, clutching her shawl. She should be frightened, furious, even hateful. Instead, she found herself glancing back at him again and again, her heart unsteady. The way his eyes followed her was not the gaze of a helpless man. It was the gaze of someone who saw her not as a widow clinging to survival, but as a woman. That night, when she crept back to the barn with broth and clean cloths, she found Cale awake, watching the crack in the roof where moonlight spilled in. He turned as she entered, and for the first time, he spoke her name, soft and certain, Lydia. Her breath caught in her throat. Hearing her name from his lips was like hearing it for the first time in years alive, whole, unforgotten. And though fear still wrapped around her like a noose, Lydia felt a spark of something she had not felt since before her husband died. Hope. The days slipped by like shadows over the prairie, each one stretching Lydia's nerves tighter, yet weaving a thread of something new through her heart. She tended Cale in secret, never daring to keep him in the house, always returning to the barn at dawn and dusk with broth, bandages, and whispered warnings. And with every visit, the air between them grew heavier, not with fear alone, but with something else Lydia scarcely allowed herself to name. On the third morning, she found him sitting upright for the first time, his broad back resting against a beam. The sight made her breath falter. Even weakened, Cale looked carved from stone, the light from the cracked roof slanting across the lines of his chest and the band of turquoise resting at his throat. His long black hair tumbled loose, half hiding the intensity of his gaze as he watched her step inside. "You should be lying down," she scolded softly, setting the tray in her hands on the stool beside him. Cale's lips curved, just barely, but enough to make her pulse quicken. "I am not weak." His voice, low and rough, carried more pride than his body could justify. "You nearly died in my arms," she replied, kneeling to check the bandage at his side. Her hands hovered over him, not quite touching, though the heat radiating from his skin reached her all the same. "That arrow missed your lung by a hair." "Don't tell me you're not weak." His dark eyes caught hers, and in them she saw not offense but something deeper, something that unsettled her. "And you," he said, voice softer now, "are not afraid." The words rooted her in place. She wanted to deny it, to insist she was terrified, but she couldn't. Her fear of discovery was real, yet when she was here, with him, tending his wounds, fear gave way to something stronger. She shook her head, breaking eye contact. "I don't know what I am anymore." She unwound the soiled cloth, revealing angry red skin where the wound had begun to knit together. Cale flinched but did not pull away. Instead, he said, "You have strong hands." Lydia froze. No one had ever spoken to her like that. Her husband had praised her cooking, her sewing, her ability to run a ranch when men doubted her, but never her hands. The words slid into her chest like a secret she didn't know she'd been waiting for. Cheeks burned as she cleaned the wound and tied the fresh bandage. Cale's gaze never wavered. Later, when she set a bowl of broth in his hands, he gestured for her to sit across from him. She hesitated, then lowered herself onto the hay. They ate in silence, the only sounds the creak of the barn and the restless shifting of horses. After a long moment, Cale lifted his hand, pointing toward the crack in the roof where a sliver of sky showed. "Juki," he said. Lydia frowned. "What does that mean?" "Sky," he answered simply. She repeated it, stumbling over the unfamiliar syllables. He corrected her gently, the sound of his low voice shaping the word until she managed it. A flicker of pride lit his face, and Lydia felt warmth bloom inside her. They traded words as the morning stretched on his language for hers, hers for his. When she mispronounced, he laughed softly, and the sound startled her, rich and alive. She hadn't realized how much she had missed laughter until that moment. At one point, her hand brushed his while passing the bowl back. Neither of them moved for a heartbeat. The touch was slight, accidental, but it sent a shiver through her all the same. Lydia withdrew quickly, her shawl clutched tight. She should not feel this way. He was a stranger, a danger. Worse still, he was everything the town had taught her to fear. Yet when she looked at him, at the strength he carried even in weakness, the calm in his voice, the way he said her name as though it belonged to him. Something inside her stirred awake as she rose to leave. Cale's voice followed her. "Lydia," she paused, hand on the barn door. "You are not like others." Her throat tightened. She dared not turn, dared not let him see the truth rising in her eyes. "Neither are you," she whispered, then slipped out into the pale light of morning, the sound of her own heartbeat louder than the crows calling over the fields. That night, as she lay alone in her narrow bed, Lydia realized she had crossed an invisible line. Cale was no longer just a wounded man she had saved. He was a presence in her thoughts, a warmth in her chest, a danger to the wall she had built around her heart. And for the first time in 3 years, she did not feel empty. She felt alive. The days that followed were unlike anything Anna had ever known. Life at the edge of the desert, with Cale always near, had taken on a rhythm both strange and comforting. He moved with the quiet grace of a predator, but his words, when he chose to share them, were soft meant only for her. Anna often found herself watching him from a distance, the way his shoulders gleamed in the sun as he worked with his hands, carving tools, tending the fire, or leading his horse to water. The tribal jewelry he wore, strings of turquoise and carved bone, seemed less like ornaments and more like pieces of his spirit. And though he rarely spoke of his people, his silence carried stories she longed to uncover. One evening, as the sky burned with hues of orange and purple, Cale returned from scouting the hills. His long black hair rippled against his back as he approached, his bare chest catching the fading light. He stopped before her, his dark eyes fixed on the horizon. "They will come soon," he said, his voice deep, steady. "Who?" Anna asked, clutching the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "My people. My brothers. They search for me even now." He turned, his gaze landing on her with a weight she could hardly bear. "When they find me, they will expect me to return." Alone. The word alone struck her like an arrow. Anna's breath faltered. "And will you?" Cale didn't answer right away. He crouched near the fire, feeding it with dry wood. Sparks leapt into the twilight air, dancing between them like restless spirits. Finally, he spoke. "I was never meant to linger here," he said slowly. "But something binds me. Something I did not expect." Anna's heart thudded painfully in her chest. "Me?" she whispered. Cale's jaw tightened, but he nodded. He rose to his full height, towering above her, his expression torn between strength and vulnerability. His long fingers brushed against the necklace at his throat, then dropped to his side as though even touching her might be dangerous. "You are not of my world, Anna. Your people fear mine. My people do not trust yours. To be near you is to court fire. And yet," his voice cracked ever so slightly, "and yet I cannot stop." Anna swallowed hard. The truth of his words stung, but her heart surged with a wild courage. Maybe we don't belong to either world. Maybe we only belong to each other. For a moment, silence stretched, broken only by the whisper of the wind across the desert. Cale's chest rose and fell heavily. He stepped closer, his shadow mingling with hers in the flickering firelight. "I fear what will happen if I choose you," he admitted, his voice raw. "But I fear more what will happen if I do not." Anna's hand trembled as she reached for him. Her fingers brushed against his skin, warm and solid beneath the beads of his necklace. The moment their touch connected, something within her shifted like the desert itself had leaned closer to listen. Cale closed his eyes, as though surrendering to a truth he could no longer fight. "You are in my blood now," he murmured, "and no command, no tribe, no war will take that from me." Anna felt tears sting her eyes, but they were not of sorrow. They were of relief, of knowing that even if the world turned against them, in that moment she was not alone. The fire crackled, throwing shadows across Cale's powerful frame. His long black hair shimmered like midnight silk, and the tribal jewelry on his chest glimmered in the flames. To Anna, he was no longer just a warrior of the Apache, he was Cale, the man who had risked everything for her, and the man she would risk everything to keep. For the first time, she leaned into him, her cheek resting against his chest. His heartbeat thundered beneath her ear, steady and strong, like the drum of the earth itself. "Then don't let go," she whispered Dot, and in that moment, Cale wrapped his arms around her, holding her as though she were both his greatest weakness and his only salvation. The night had been long, yet Anna hardly slept. She lay against Cale's chest, listening to the rhythm of his heartbeat. Outside their small camp, the desert stretched endless and still, but in her mind, storms brewed. For the first time since her husband's death, she did not feel the weight of loneliness. Instead, she felt the weight of a choice, and one that might cost her everything. Cale stirred before dawn, rising silently. His powerful silhouette moved through the fading firelight, his long black hair glistening as he gathered his bow and spear. The tribal jewelry across his chest caught the faint glow of embers, a reminder of the heritage he carried with him always. Anna pushed herself up on her elbows. "You're leaving?" Her voice cracked from the dryness of the night air and from fear. He turned, his dark eyes locking onto hers. "Not leaving. Watching." His voice was deep calm, but edged with caution. "I saw smoke yesterday on the ridges. Riders, perhaps. We must be careful." The thought of strangers finding them cowboys from town, or warriors from his tribe, sent a chill racing down Anna's spine. She wrapped the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "And if they do find us?" Cale paused. For a moment, his jaw tightened, as though weighing 1,000 unspoken truths. Then, softly, he said, "Then we stand together." The words should have frightened her, but instead they anchored her. She rose and stepped to him, barefoot in the cool sand, her hand brushing against his arm. His muscles tensed beneath her touch, but he did not pull away. "You've given me something I thought I'd lost forever," she whispered. "Hope." His gaze softened, the firelight reflecting in his eyes like molten gold. Slowly, he reached out, tucking a stray lock of her hair behind her ear. The tenderness of the gesture unraveled her, leaving her trembling not from fear but from the dangerous ache of desire. "I should not," he murmured, his voice strained. "But I cannot turn from you, Anna." Her breath caught as his hand lingered against her cheek. The world beyond the threat of discovery, the whispers of the desert faded into silence. There was only Cale standing before her, raw and unguarded. And then, without warning, the crack of a rifle shattered the stillness. Anna gasped, clutching Cale's arm as the echo rolled across the mesas. A second shot rang out, closer this time, followed by the distant shouts of men. Cale's eyes hardened instantly. He pushed Anna gently behind him, his body shielding hers as he scanned the dark horizon. His every movement shifted from lover to warrior, primal and precise. "They are near," he growled. "Stay low." Anna's heart pounded violently in her chest. She crouched by the fire as Cale moved forward, bow in hand, his powerful frame illuminated by the firelight. He was no longer just the man who had held her through the night, he was the protector, the fighter, the embodiment of danger and strength. The desert wind carried voices, harsh, angry, and closing fast. Anna's pulse quickened as she realized the truth. Neither his people nor hers would accept what they had found together. Cale turned back to her, his eyes fierce but steady. "No matter who they are, I will not let them take you." The weight of his words struck her deeper than any bullet could. He was willing to stand against his own people, against hers, for her. Anna rose to her knees, her voice shaking. "Then we fight together." For the first time, Cale allowed a flicker of a smile, brief, fierce, and filled with something that felt like destiny. The desert night seemed to hold its breath as the riders drew closer. their shadows breaking across the ridge. Anna's fingers tightened around the blanket, but her heart no longer trembled in fear. She had made her choice. Cale stood tall before her, shirtless and unyielding, his long black hair whipping in the wind, his tribal jewelry glinting like war paint in the firelight. He looked like a spirit called out of legend, both lover and warrior, both danger and salvation. And in that moment, Anna knew, whatever came out of the darkness, their souls were already bound by desire, by fate, and by a love that neither tribe nor bullet could silence. The desert erupted with chaos. The riders crested the ridge, dark silhouettes against the moonlit sky. Their voices carried through the night shouts, curses, the crack of gun metal snapping into place. Anna's breath caught in her throat as she clutched the blanket tighter, her eyes locked on Cale. He stood before her like a wall of flesh and spirit, his body bare but unyielding, his long black hair whipping across his shoulders. The turquoise and bone jewelry around his neck shimmered as if the fire itself had chosen him as its champion. "Stay down," he commanded, his voice deep and sharp, meant to cut through her fear. Anna obeyed, crouching low, but her heart screamed in protest. Every beat of her chest wanted to rise, to fight, to stand at his side. She had never felt more powerless or more bound to him. The first rider charged down the slope, his rifle raised. Cale's movements were swift, primal. In one fluid motion, he drew his bow, the string pulling taut across his muscular frame. The arrow sang through the night and struck its mark with deadly precision. The rider toppled, crashing into the sand. Anna gasped. Her hands pressed against her lips, but her eyes burned not with fear, but with awe. Cale was more than a man, he was a force. Two more riders thundered forward, firing their rifles. The bullets ripped through the air, splintering the wood near the fire. Sparks leapt upward, showering Anna in fleeting embers. She ducked, heart pounding, as Cale rolled across the sand, launching another arrow that felled a second attacker. The third rider came closer, his horse kicking up dust. Anna's eyes widened as she saw the man's face illuminated by the fire, Elias Hart, a ranch hand from town. A man who had once tipped his hat at her, who now bore a look of pure hatred. "Widow!" Elias shouted, his voice cruel. "You shame your husband's name lying with a savage." Anna froze, her throat tight with rage and terror. But before she could speak, Cale loosed another arrow, grazing Elias's arm and sending his rifle clattering to the dirt. "Go back," Cale warned, his voice deep, commanding. "This is not your fight." But Elias only snarled, clutching his wounded arm. "She doesn't belong to you. She belongs to us, the town, the law. You'll die for this, warrior." The words sliced through Anna. Belong? She had been treated like property her entire life by her late husband's coldness, by the town's judgment, by whispers that followed her widowhood. Now, as Elias's voice dripped with venom, she felt something inside her ignite. "No!" she cried, rising to her feet. Her voice rang out louder than she expected, stronger than she had ever dared. "I belong to no one. Not to the town. Not to the past. Only to myself." Her eyes found Cale's, burning in the firelight. And to him, the declaration stole the air from the night. For a moment, even the riders hesitated, their horses stamping nervously in the sand. Cale's chest rose, pride flashing in his gaze, but there was no time for words. More riders poured down the ridge, their weapons glinting in the moonlight. Cale stepped forward, placing himself fully between Anna and the oncoming men. His muscles rippled as he raised his spear, his body gleaming with sweat and firelight. His voice carried like thunder. "Then they will learn tonight I fight not only as a warrior of my people, but as the man who will not lose the woman who holds his soul." The ground shook with hooves. The air cracked with gunfire, and the desert seemed to roar in response. Anna pressed her hands to her chest, her heart warring with terror and unshakable devotion. The battle had begun, and with it came the truth she had feared and longed for. Their love was no longer hidden in the quiet of the night. It was written now in fire, in blood, in defiance that could not be silenced. And as Cale launched himself into the fray, Anna knew whether the desert swallowed them whole or the dawn rose on their survival, their souls were already bound forever. The desert was a battlefield of silence. Smoke drifted upward from the dying campfire, and the metallic tang of blood clung to the air. Horses whinnied nervously in the distance, their riders either fallen or fled. The night's chaos had broken, leaving only the ragged breath of survival. Anna stood trembling, her blanket half torn, her heart still thundering from the terror and fury of what she had witnessed. Her eyes darted across the scene until they landed on him, Cale, standing tall in the moonlight, his spear slick with the fight, his chest heaving from exhaustion. His long black hair clung to his shoulders, wild and untamed, his tribal jewelry streaked with dust and sweat. But he was alive. "Cale," she whispered. Stumbling toward him, her voice cracked with both relief and fear. He turned at the sound of her voice, his dark eyes softening instantly when they found hers. His hand dropped the spear to the sand, and in the next heartbeat she was in his arms. He pulled her against him, his body trembling not with weakness, but with the force of holding back everything he had endured for her. "You are safe," he murmured into her hair, his voice rough. "That is all that matters." Anna clutched him tighter, her tears spilling freely onto his chest. "You could have died. They could have taken you from me." His hand cupped the back of her head, steady and grounding. "I would face death 1,000 times if it meant you would live." The words seared into her, breaking whatever remained of the walls she had built since her husband's passing. For so long she had been bound by duty, by sorrow, by the whispers of a town that had never seen her as anything but a widow. Now in the arms of this warrior, she felt something far greater than survival. She felt alive, but even in the glow of their embrace, reality pressed close. "Cale," she whispered, pulling back enough to see his face. "Your people, they will come. And mine after tonight, they will never let this rest." Cale's jaw tightened, shadows flickering in his gaze. He glanced toward the horizon where the first faint streaks of dawn painted the sky. Yes, the world will not forgive what it does not understand. Her hand slid down his arm, fingers entwining with his. "Then let the world go. I don't need their forgiveness. I only need you." For a moment, Cale's expression was unreadable, caught between the weight of his heritage and the fire of his desire. Then, slowly, his hand lifted to her cheek, his thumb brushing across her skin as though sealing a vow. "You would leave it all?" he asked softly. "The town, the land, the name you carried?" Anna swallowed hard, her voice steady with conviction. "I already left it the moment I chose you." The wind stirred, carrying the scent of sage and smoke, wrapping around them like an unseen witness. Cale lowered his forehead to hers, his breath warm and steady. "Then we go," he said finally, "far from here, to where the land does not speak with the voices of the dead, but with the promise of the living." She closed her eyes, pressing her lips to his chest, hearing the thunder of his heart. It was not an easy path. It was not a safe one. But it was theirs. As the dawn grew brighter, Cale led her toward his horse, its dark coat shimmering in the early light. Anna climbed onto its back with his help, her hands trembling not from fear but from anticipation. He swung up behind her, his arms circling her waist, grounding her in the strength she had come to know as her home. Together, they rode away from the blood-soaked sand, the town, the past. The desert stretched before them, vast and merciless, but alive with possibility. Anna leaned back against him, her eyes fixed on the rising sun. She had hidden her desire once, buried it beneath grief and duty, but no longer. Kale's kiss had set her soul ablaze, and now there was no going back. Their love might burn against the world itself, but in the fire of it, they would carve out a new life together, bound not by fear, but by the kind of love that dared to defy everything. And as the desert dawn swallowed them whole, Anna knew with unshakable certainty the story of the widow and the warrior was only beginning.